I brought the cart into the great hall of Thornvale myself, which I am told is not done, and I unloaded it in front of 400 people with my hands wrapped in linen because they were not fit to be looked at. Every gift, 14 months of them, piled on the floor of that hall in front of the whole court like a market stall at the end of a bad day. And then I read out the list. I am a smith. Smiths keep lists. What came in, what went out, what it weighed, what it cost. Because a smith who does not keep a list is a smith who is robbed inside a year. I had kept mine for 14 months out of pure spite, and I stood in that hall and read every line of it aloud, in a voice I could not entirely hold steady. It took 9 minutes, and somewhere around the 4th minute I heard the King of Thornvale say, very quietly, from a throne he had come halfway out of, "I never sent that." 14 months earlier, I had told that same man to his face that his iron levy was going to close every village forge in the north, and then I had gone home and thought no more about it. My name is Greta, and I am the smith at Marne, not the smith's widow, not the smith's daughter. The smith. My father taught me because he had no sons and no intention of apologizing for it, and when he died I was 23, and I took the forge, and by the time this story starts I was 33, and had been shoeing every horse and mending every plough within 9 miles for a decade. Marne is 400 people, a mill, a church, and my forge. That is the whole of it. Everybody knows everybody's business, and I want you to hold on to that, because it is the hinge this entire story turns on, and nobody at Thornvale understood it for 14 months. The petition was in the spring. The Crown had put a levy on pig iron, the raw stuff, the bar we buy in, to arm the Northern Line, and it had doubled our price in a season. That is survivable for a keep forge with a Crown contract. It is not survivable for a village smith with 40 customers who cannot pay more for a ploughshare than a ploughshare is worth. 9 villages sent a delegation. I went because the others sent their headmen, and their headmen were all farmers. And the only person in that party who could explain the actual arithmetic of a forge was the person who ran one. They gave us 4 minutes. I have never been in a room like that before or since. 400 people and a throne at the end of it, and the King of Thornvale sitting in it, King Stannis, 11 years on that throne, and I had never laid eyes on the man in my life, and had no particular feelings about him one way or another. The headman of Ashby said his piece, badly, and there was a great deal of very polite nodding, and I could feel the whole room preparing to be gracious at us and send us home. So I said mine. Your Grace, with respect, everyone here is doing the arithmetic wrong. You are counting the levy against what a forge earns. Count it against what a forge holds. I carry about 11 bar of iron at a time, and that is my entire capital. I cannot hold more. I have nowhere to keep it, and no coin to buy it. So when the price doubles, I do not earn less. I stop being able to replace stock at all, and in about 9 months I close. And when I close, the 40 families I shoe for stop having a smith within 9 miles. Somebody tried to interrupt me. I did not let them, which I understand is also not done. You will not notice us going, I said. That is the part I have come to say. Forges do not fail loudly. There will simply be a year when the North cannot get a plough mended, and every one of you will wonder why the harvest is short. And not one person in this hall will connect it to a levy signed in the spring by men who have never bought a bar of iron in their lives. And then our 4 minutes were up, and they thanked us very courteously, and we went home. I thought about it for perhaps 2 days. I was quite proud of the holds, not earns line, which I had worked out on the road and delivered rather well. And then a mare threw a shoe, and I forgot the entire business. The first gift came 11 days later, a bolt of silk, blue and very fine, and worth, I found out later, about 9 months of my income, delivered to my forge door by 2 men in good coats, with no name attached to it at all. I stood there holding a bolt of silk in a leather apron with a scold on my forearm, and I thought, Because I knew what this was. Every woman who works alone knows what this is. There is a particular kind of well-off man who sees a woman running a trade without a husband and reads it as a vacancy, and I had been fending off a version of this since I was 24. And this one simply had more money than the others. So I sent it back with a note. I want to be clear that I was perfectly polite in the first one. Sir, I cannot accept this, and I have no use for it. I work in a forge. It would be a light within the hour. Please do not send anything further. G. of Marne. 9 days later, a purse came. Gold, and a great deal of it. Sir, I am returning this untouched. I do not know if you have ever lived in a village of 400 people. If a woman who lives alone is seen receiving gold from a man nobody can name, then by Tuesday everybody in Marne knows exactly what she must have done to get it. You are not being generous. You are being expensive to me. Stop, G. 12 days later he sent a horse. A grey gelding, 4 years old, beautifully made, worth more than my forge and everything in it. I stood in my yard and looked at that animal for a long time, and then I went in and wrote the shortest note of the entire correspondence, which is the one that everybody in the north now knows, and which I did not intend to be funny. I have nowhere to put this. That is all it said. I did not sign it. I was too tired, and I meant it entirely literally, which is the part that still makes me want to put my head in my hands. A horse needs a stable I do not have, and hay I cannot buy, and a farrier, I am the farrier. That is not the point. And a horse standing in a smith's yard eating nothing is a horse that dies slowly in front of 40 families, who will all draw exactly one conclusion about the woman who let it happen. 8 days later, he sent 2 horses. I want to describe my reaction accurately. I went outside, and there were 2 horses, and 2 men in livery holding them, and I stood in my own yard in front of my own forge and said out loud to nobody, "Do you think the problem was quantity?" That went in the note. Most of it did. That note was 4 pages long, and I wrote it at 11 at night with the fire banked, and I did not soften one line of it, and I have since had it read back to me by the man who received it, out loud, twice, with enormous relish, and I have had to leave the room both times. I did not know I was writing to the King of Thornevale. He read every one of them. That is the part I found out much later and have never entirely recovered from. 14 months. Every note. He kept them in the drawer of his own desk in the order they arrived, and, this is the detail Ansel gave me and I have never forgiven him for it, he had begun reading them to people. Not to the court. To Ansel, who was his second and had served him 9 years, at 11 at night, in a study, with a cup of something, in the manner of a man who has found a poem. You have to understand what those notes were doing to him, Ansel told me later. That man has not been told no in 11 years. Not once, not by anybody, and I include myself in that, and I am not proud of it. He rubbed his face. And then a smith in Marne writes to him that he is expensive to her, that his generosity is a cost. Do you know what a king hears his whole life? He hears yes. He has never once in his adult life been handed a bill for his own kindness, and apparently he had started smiling. That was the thing the court noticed, and the court was, Ansel's word, alarmed. King Stannis of Thornevale had a reputation as a man of iron composure and 11 years of a face like a shut door, and somewhere in that autumn he had begun smiling in council for no reason anybody could identify, occasionally in the middle of business, and twice he had been observed doing it while alone. There was, Ansel said, genuine concern about his health. I found out who it was in the 9th month, and I found out because of the 2nd horse. Not the 2-horse business. Later, a mare sent in the autumn, and I had refused so many times by then that I had stopped writing full notes and had begun simply sending things back with the word no on a scrap, which I gather he also kept. But this time I recognised the mare. I shoe every horse within 9 miles. I know feet the way other people know faces, and I had shod that mare 11 weeks earlier at Ashby, and I knew who she was, and she was the property of the Crown's remount station at Ellin. I sat down on my anvil for quite a while. Then I did the arithmetic I should have done in the spring. Silk, gold, 3 horses, and a man who could reach into a Crown remount station and take a mare out of it. And a woman who had stood up in the great hall of Thornavale and told the King of the North he was doing his own arithmetic wrong, and then gone home and never thought about it again. I went to the keep the next morning. I was extremely angry, and I want to be honest that at least a third of that anger was pure humiliation at not having worked it out in the spring. They did not let me in. Obviously, I am a village smith with soot in the creases of my hands and no appointment. I stood at the gate for most of a day, and I was still there at dusk when Ansel came out to see what the noise was about, and I said, "Tell him the woman with nowhere to put a horse would like a word," and I watched a man's entire face change. I got in. They put me in a small room off the west stair and left me in it for about an hour, which I spent standing up, because I had soot in the creases of my hands and there were chairs in there worth more than my forge. I had a speech. I want that on the record. I had been building it since the anvil, and it was extremely good. It had the word contemptible in it twice, and I had got as far as rehearsing the opening under my breath when the door went. He came into that room, and I want to tell you what I actually felt, because it was not what the ballads say, and it was not one word of my speech. I felt no triumph at all. I looked at the King of Thornvale, a big, quiet, tired-looking man who had come in too fast and stopped too far away, and I understood, in one go, that he had no idea what he had done to me. "You're the merchant," I said. "Yes." "You are not a merchant." "No," said King Stannis. "I am not." I did not know yet that almost none of what had been done to me had actually been his doing. If you want to find out what 14 months of gifts were really for, and what a smith's list can prove that a king's own word cannot, stay with me. What I worked out in that room cost me my hands and very nearly my trade, and I would do the whole of it again. "Do you know what you have done to my life?" And he said, and this is the moment I stopped being able to hate him, which was extremely inconvenient, I am beginning to. I have read the notes, I have read them a great many times, and I have understood about a third of what is in them, and I have understood more of it every month, and I have not stopped sending things, and I do not have a defence for that. Then why? Because I did not know how to be refused, he said. That is the whole of it, and it is not an excuse. In 11 years, nobody has declined anything I have offered. When you sent the silk back, my council told me it had been insufficient. When you sent the gold back, they told me the same. Every man in my household understands a refusal as a negotiation, because in this keep that is what a refusal has always been, and I had nothing else to reach for. He looked at his own hands. You wrote to me that I was expensive to you. I have thought about that sentence every day for 9 months. I have never in my life been a cost to anybody. Something in me went very still and very clear. For 14 months I had been writing notes to a man I thought was a nuisance. Sharp ones, blunt ones, 4 pages at 11 at night. But underneath every single one of them, I had been doing the thing a woman alone in a trade learns to do before she is 25, which is to refuse a powerful man politely enough that he does not become an enemy. I had thought I was being fierce. I had been managing him, carefully, expertly, for 14 months, the way you manage a bad customer. And I was done. Sit down, I said. He sat down. The King of Thornavale sat down in his own keep, because a smith told him to, and neither of us remarked on it, and I did not soften one single thing I said for the next hour. I am going to explain about the horses, I said, and you are going to listen to all of it, including the parts that make you feel unwell, because you have cost me 14 months, and I am not going to spend this conversation being tactful at you as well. So the King of Thornavale sat down at a table, and a village smith explained to him, for about an hour, the actual cost of keeping a horse. Hay, stabling, what a beast eats in a winter. What happens to a woman standing in a village of 400 when a gelding worth 9 years of her income appears in her yard from a man with no name? What the priest had begun saying, what 2 of the farmers had stopped bringing me, that my trade had dropped by about 1/3 since the spring, and that I had spent the summer working out whether I would need to leave Marne. He did not interrupt once. At the end of it, he said, "I have been ruining you." Yes, publicly, that is the only way it can be done in a village that size. And King Stannis of Thornevale put his head in his hands, briefly, which is a thing I am told nobody in that Keep had ever seen, and then he looked up and said, "Then I will stop. Today, entirely, and I will send nothing further of any kind. And I would like to be permitted to make one argument first, and then I will accept whatever you say and we will never speak of it again." "Go on." "Your petition was correct," he said. "Holds, not earns. I have thought about that for 14 months as well, and I have not been able to get an honest answer out of a single man in this keep about the iron levy since, and I have begun to suspect I am being managed." He met my eyes. "That is not a courtship. That is crown business, and I would have come to you about it in the spring if I had had the faintest idea how to speak to a person who did not want anything from me. Will you tell me about the iron?" We wrote to each other after that. Properly, both ways, with names on. I want to be accurate about this period, because it is the part I am most sentimental about, and I do not entirely trust myself. He sent nothing, not one thing, not once, for 5 months, and that restraint from a man who had spent 14 months unable to stop is the single most romantic thing anybody has ever done for me, and I did not appreciate it nearly enough at the time. What he sent was questions, pages of them, about iron, mostly, and then about everything else, how a forge is banked overnight, what a bad weld looks like, why Marne's mill takes 1/10 and Ashby's takes 1/12, what 40 families do when the harvest is short. He wrote a terrible hand and spelled like a man who had been taught by 4 different tutors who disliked each other. And I wrote back, at length, in the evenings, with my feet up, and told him he was wrong about things. That was the whole of the courtship. A king of the north being told he was wrong about things by post, twice a week, for 5 months, by a woman with soot under her nails, and I have since had it explained to me, by Ansel, at some length, what that did to that man, and I do not intend to repeat it here, because he would be mortified. His wolf turned up in the 4th month, which I gather was not authorised. I came out at dawn to bank the fire, and there was an animal the size of a pony lying across my forge doorway, with an expression of enormous self-satisfaction, having come 19 miles overnight, and I said, "Absolutely not." And he did not move, and I stepped over him and got on with my work. He stayed 4 days. He was, I will admit, extremely useful. Nothing gets stolen from a yard with that lying in it, and by the 3rd day the 40 families of Marne had stopped asking me about it, and by the 4th 2 children had ridden him, which I am told would have caused a diplomatic incident had anyone at Thornevale found out. Stannis's letter about it was 4 lines long, and I have kept it. He has gone. I did not send him. I have been informed he was seen on the Marne road. I have no control over this animal whatsoever, and I would be grateful if you would not encourage him. I encouraged him enormously. The forge burned in the 5th month. I want to tell this plainly. It went up at about 2 in the morning in the wrong season, with the fire banked properly, the way I have banked it every night for 10 years, and I got out with the mare and my father's hammers, and both my hands went into it, up to the wrist, getting the 2nd lot out. The linen was on them for 11 weeks. I have most of the use back. I do not have all of it, and I never will. And there are 3 things I could do at 33 that I cannot do now, and I have made my peace with 2 of them. And here is what a village of 400 people decided within a day, because a village of 400 people always decides within a day, that the woman who had been receiving gifts from a man nobody could name had burned her own forge for the insurance, or out of carelessness, or out of drink. A smith who burns her own forge is finished. That is not gossip, it is trade. You cannot bring iron to a woman who cannot mind a fire. It is the one thing we are for. Marn did not bring me work again. Not one of the 40 families. Not out of cruelty, out of arithmetic, which is worse, and which I understood completely, and which I have never held against a single one of them. I did not write to Stannis about it. He found out anyway, 11 days later, and what he did next is the reason I ended up in that hall with a cart. He came to Marn. Not with a column. He rode into that village with Ansel and 4 men, and he came to the burned yard where I was sitting on the anvil. The anvil survives everything, that is rather the point of an anvil, with my hands wrapped, and he got down off his horse and stood in the ash and did not come any closer. I want to say 4 things, he said, and then I want you to tell me to go, if you want to. Say them. 1. I did not do this, and I will prove it. 2. I know that the reason it could be done to you at all is 14 months of my gifts, and that is mine, and I am not going to argue about it. 3. His voice was not steady. 3. I have brought no gift, and I am not going to, and I am aware that a man arriving in a burned yard with a purse would be the single most contemptible thing I could do, and I have thought about doing it the entire way here. And 4. 4. Your list, said the King of Thornvale. Ansel tells me you keep one. Do you still have it? I did. Of course I did. It was in the tin in the cold cellar where a smith keeps her books, and it had not burned, and I had 14 months of every single thing that had ever arrived at my door, what it was, what day, who brought it, and what I judged it to be worth. Because I am a tradeswoman, and I have written down everything that has entered my yard since I was 23. Bring it to the keep, he said, in front of the court. Read it out. Why? Because I have been making a list of my own for 5 months, said Stannis, and I have been going quietly out of my mind, and I need to know whether yours says the same thing. Here is what neither of us had noticed for 14 months, and I have never stopped being annoyed about it, because it was in both our accounts from the very beginning. He sent things quietly. That is what he believed, and it is what he had ordered. No name, no livery, no ceremony, an anonymous gift, discreetly delivered, because he understood at least that much about a woman with a trade and no husband. I received events. 2 men in crown livery announcing a horse in the square at Marn. A bolt of silk carried the length of the village at noon. A purse handed over in front of the mill. We had said it to each other a dozen times, and neither of us had heard it. He said I sent a mare. I said they brought a mare through the village at midday, and made me sign for it in front of the mill. And every single time we both simply carried on, because he had no idea how a village works, and I had no idea that a king's order might arrive at my door, bearing no resemblance to what he had actually said. Everything he sent had gone through the Master of Gifts. Lord Perrin had held that office for 19 years. It is not a grand office. It is a functionary's post, the crown's presence, the seasonal disbursements, the flowers to a widowed countess, and it had been in his family for 3 generations, along with something considerably more valuable, which was the crown's pig iron contract. Every bar of iron the crown bought for the northern line came through Perrin's house. The levy that was closing 40 village forges had made his family the only supplier of consequence in the north, and in the spring a smith from Marn had stood in that hall and told the King of Thorneville that he was doing his arithmetic wrong. Perrin could not silence me. I had already spoken. What he could do, what he had 19 years of office and a monopoly on the king's own generosity to do, was make absolutely certain that when the King of Thornvale next thought about that woman and about her petition, she would be a scandal instead of a witness. He did not have to invent a thing. He only had to take a lonely man's clumsy gifts and deliver them as loudly as possible in a village of 400 people, and let a decade of my standing rot in the open. And when that was no longer enough, when the letters started, and the king began asking questions about iron that his own household could not answer, he burned my forge. The haul took 9 minutes. I read the list. Every line, what arrived, what day, who brought it, in what manner, before how many witnesses. Because I had written all of that down for 14 months, out of nothing but the ordinary habit of a woman who has been robbed before. And at the 4th minute the king came halfway out of his throne and said, "I never sent that." There were 11 things on my list that he had never ordered. There were 4 things he had ordered that never arrived at all. And there was not one single item, not one, in 14 months that had reached my door in the quiet, nameless way he had instructed every time. An office of 19 years came apart in about a quarter of an hour, in public, on a discrepancy in 2 lists kept by 2 people who had never once compared them. Perrin did not confess, and never has. There was no need. The household's own dispatch records were in Ansell's hands by nightfall, and they agreed with my tin. He lost the office, the contract, and eventually rather more than that. And I did not attend any of it. Because by then, my hands were the thing I cared about, and there was nothing in that trial that would give them back. The iron levy was repealed in the spring. Not because of the fire, and not because of the romance, because a king who had spent 5 months being told by post that he was wrong about things had finally got hold of a number that was not Perrin's, and had done the arithmetic himself, in his own hand, badly, on a page I still have. Holds, not earns. He wrote it at the top. He had spelled holds wrong. He asked me in the burned yard, in the end, which was correct of him, not in the hall. He had learned, by then, exactly what a public gesture does to a woman in front of 400 people, and I want to give him full credit for that, because it took a fire and 14 months of ruin to teach him, and he never once needed teaching twice. He came back to Marne in the spring, alone, and stood in the ash where the forge had been, and said, "I have brought nothing." I want you to notice that. I have been not bringing you things for 11 months now, and it is the hardest work I have ever done. I've noticed. I have 3 things to say, and none of them are gifts. He was standing about 6 feet away, the way he always did. 1. Your forge will be rebuilt whether you ever speak to me again or not, out of the Crown's iron accounts, because it burned as a consequence of a Crown officer protecting a Crown contract, and that is a debt this territory owes you and not a present from me. Ansell has the papers, and they are already signed, and they do not have my name anywhere on them. 2. Your hands. His jaw went tight. I cannot fix them. I have asked 4 physicians, and I have been told the same thing 4 times, and I have made them all say it twice. He took a breath. So 3. Marne has no Smith and 40 families, with 9 miles to travel, and you can no longer do 3 of the things you used to do, and I have been told by Ansell that I am to say this next part exactly as he wrote it, because if I improvise, I will ruin it. He actually produced a piece of paper. He read off it. There is no Smith in the north who can teach what you know. You have said yourself that a village loses a forge and nobody notices for a year. Thornavale will pay you to train smiths, apprentices, from villages chosen by you, and the Crown will fund the forges they go back to. That is not charity, and it is not a courtship. It is the cheapest thing this territory could possibly do, and I have had the numbers checked. Twice. He put the paper away. And I would like to ask you something else, entirely separately, on a different day, when you have had time to decide about the first thing without me standing in your yard. Because I have finally understood what I did wrong for 14 months. And it was not the silk or the gold or the horses. He looked at me. It was that I never once asked you a question I might not like the answer to. I kissed him first, in the ash, with my hands wrapped, in a burned yard in front of nobody at all. It was brief, and it was warm, and it settled something in me that had been braced since I was 24, and first worked out what a certain kind of man means by a gift. 2 years on, there are 9 forges in the north that were not there before, and I trained every one of the smiths in them, and 4 of the 9 are women, which caused a great deal of correspondence that I enjoyed enormously. Marn has a forge again. I do not run it, Belle does, who was my second apprentice and is better than I ever was at fine work, and who will not let me near the fine work, and who is entirely right about that. I do the heavy stuff and the teaching, and I am at the anvil most days, which is all I ever wanted out of a life. My hands are what they are. Cold mornings are bad. I cannot do a scrolled hinge anymore, and I have stopped pretending it does not bother me. And the 40 families brought their work back within the month, every one of them, and not one of them ever apologised, and I have never once wanted them to. They did the arithmetic. It was the correct arithmetic with the information they had. Perrin gave them that information on purpose, and they are not the ones who should be sorry. Stannis still writes to me, from the next room occasionally, which I have asked him to stop doing, and which he will not. He has never given me a gift, not one, in 2 years, not for a name day or a season or anything else, and the entire court finds it baffling and slightly scandalous, and I have never explained it to a single one of them. What he gives me instead is questions, 2 or 3 a week, about iron and mills and tithes and 40 families, and he still spells like a man taught by 4 warring tutors. And I still write back and tell him he is wrong about things. The notes are in the drawer of his desk, all of them, 14 months, in order. He got them out once, early on, to read me the 4-page one about the 2 horses, and I took it off him and put it back and told him that if he ever read that aloud in front of another human being, I would put a hammer through the drawer. He has read it aloud in front of Ansel 11 times. I still wonder about the 40 families, honestly, more than I wonder about Perrin. Perrin was a man protecting a contract, and there is not much mystery in that. But a village I had shod for a decade decided about me in a day, on 1 fire and 9 months of gossip, and every single one of them was doing the sensible thing. Tell me what you would have done in the comments if the woman with the burned forge and the mysterious gifts lived at the end of your lane, and you had a plough to mend. Would you have taken it to her? Comment the list if you want to hear what Stannis's wolf did the first time he was brought into a forge with an actual fire going. And if you want more nights like this one, a king who had never once been handed a bill for his own kindness, a woman who wrote it out for him in 14 months of increasingly blunt post, and 1 tin box in a cold cellar that took down an office of 19 years, stay close. There is more of Thornvale left to tell. Where are you listening from tonight? I would love to know. Name yourself, the man at the front of that hall said, or step aside and let a woman who understands what is at stake take your place. 400 people, and every one of them knew that if I said my own name out loud in that room, a border might go to war by autumn. That is what they had told me. That is what I had believed for 6 days. That one muddy ferrywoman's answer stood between the north and a season of graves, and that the decent thing, the humble thing, the thing a girl like me was raised to do, was to stand aside and let the arrangement close over me like water. I had believed it right up until the morning I finally asked the one question nobody had wanted me to ask. I looked at the king, who had not looked away from me in 6 days. Then I said my name. 11 weeks earlier, I had been up to my waist in the spring melt with a drowning child in my arms, and I had not even known the king was there. My name is Freya, and I keep the ford at Rushford, which is not a trade anyone chooses, and is a trade somebody has to do. Rushford is a village on the Rush, which is a river that is nothing at all for 9 months of the year and a killer for the other 3, and where the road crosses it there is a ford, and at the ford there is my family. My mother kept it, and her father before her. We know the water. We know which stones move in the melt and which hold, and where the current lies about its own depth. And we take the carts across in the bad months for a copper each, and we pull people out of it for nothing, which is the actual job. I was 25 that spring. An Omega, unbonded, no house, a fairy woman is not a person anyone dresses their daughters to become. And I had pulled 9 people out of that river in my life and lost 2, and I remembered the 2. Now, the procession. Word had come 6 weeks ahead, the way it does, and it had turned Rushford inside out. King Sigurd of Frostmere was making a progress through the river villages, a choosing, they said, a lunar tour. The king going village to village to look upon the unbonded daughters of the north and choose, freely, in the old way. I need to explain the old way, because the whole of this turns on it, and nobody outside the north understands it. In Frostmere, a lunar cannot be arranged. It is the oldest law we have, older than the crown. A king's mate must be named, spoken aloud, by him, in front of witnesses, freely, and the naming is binding the moment it is heard, and it voids any prior claim or contract on either of them, and the woman named may refuse. Once, in the same breath, and if she refuses he is free, and so is she. That is the law. A spoken thing, witnessed, that cannot be unspoken. It exists so that no king of Frostmere can ever be sold into a bond or sell himself out of one, and it had held for 400 years, and hold on to it, because everybody in this story is either using it or being used by it, and it took me far too long to work out which I was. So the whole province spent 6 weeks sewing. Every girl in every river village had a gown and a gift and a place in a line, and their mothers drilled them, and Rushford was no different, and I was, I want to be clear, not in any of it. Nobody expects the ferrywoman to stand in the line. I had a river to mind. The melt was high that year. They rode in on a Tuesday at about noon, and I missed the entire thing. Because at about noon, the miller's boy went into the rush. His name was Nils, and he was 6, and he had been told 900 times to keep off the stones in the melt, and he was on the stones in the melt because there was a procession coming, and every adult who would normally have hauled him off them by his collar was lining a road in their good clothes. I did not see him go in. I heard it, you learn the sound, the particular wrong splash, and I was in the water before I had finished thinking, because that is the whole of what my body is trained to do. I will not make it dramatic. It was fast, and it was cold, and it was arithmetic. The rush in melt does not carry you down, it carries you under, into the undercut where the bank has been eaten out. And a 6-year-old goes there in about 4 seconds, and I knew exactly where the undercut was, because I have known where the undercut was my whole life, and I went to where the river was already taking him, instead of chasing where he'd gone in. You do not fight the rush. That is the first thing my mother ever taught me. You cannot out-pull it, and you cannot out-swim it. You go where it is already going, and you get there first, and you wait for it to bring you what it has taken. I got Nils on the second grab. I got us both onto the shingle. I knelt on that bank in the freezing mud and turned a 6-year-old over and pushed the river out of him until he coughed it up and screamed, which is the best sound in the world, and I sat back in the mud with my heart going and a child howling against me, soaked to the bone and shaking and not caring even slightly. And then I noticed it had gone quiet. I looked up. There was a man on a horse about 40 feet away, at the head of a column that filled the whole road, and the entire procession of the King of Frostmere had stopped dead in the road to watch a ferry woman kneel in the mud with a coughing child, and the man on the horse was looking at me with an expression I did not have a word for, and had not moved. And by the way the people around him were shifting, had not moved for some time. I did what you do. I got Nils up and got him to his mother, who had come screaming down the bank, and I stood there dripping and filthy in front of 400 people in their good clothes, and I wanted very badly to be back in the river, which is the only place I have ever known exactly what I was doing. I did not curtsy. It did not occur to me. I was covered in mud and a child had nearly died, and my hands were shaking too hard to have managed it anyway. And the King of Frostmere, without taking his eyes off me, said to the man beside him, "Tell me her name." I found out what that meant 6 weeks later. At the time I thought a great man had been struck by a rescue. The way great men are sometimes struck by small brave things, and that it would pass, and I went home and got out of my wet clothes and thought no more about it. It did not pass. Arn came to the ford the next morning, the king's second, a big, quiet man who stood at the top of my bank and looked at the water like a man who did not trust it, which showed sense. He said the king wished to speak with me. I said I had carts to take across. He said he would wait, and he did, for 3 hours, and helped me haul a stuck wheel out of the shallows in his good coat while he waited, which is when I decided I liked him. The king came to the ford himself in the end. That is the part nobody believes. He did not summon me to wherever the progress was lodging. He came down to the river. And he stopped at the top of the bank exactly where Arn had, and he looked at the water, and then he looked at me standing in it to my knees with a pole in my hand. "You went in without stopping," he said. "It was not a question. There were 400 people on that road, and every one of them was looking at me. And you went into a river in the melt without looking up once. There was a child in it, Your Grace. I am aware of what was in it." He came down the bank carefully and stood on the shingle where I had knelt the day before. "Do you know what everyone else on that road did when the boy went in?" "No, nothing," said King Sigurd. "They looked at me to see what I would do. 400 people watched a child go under and waited to take their cue from the king, and one woman was already in the water before the rest of us had finished being important at each other." He looked at me. "I have been on this progress for 4 months. I have been looked at by every unbonded woman in the north, in a line, in a gown, waiting to see what I wanted so they could be it. And then a ferry woman didn't look up. I did not have anything to say to that. I have never known what to say to a person who has decided something about me." He came back to the ford. Again and again, through the rest of that week and into the next, while the progress sat lodged at Rushford and did not move on, which I did not understand and which was, I found out later, causing a very great deal of trouble. He was not good company at first. He was a king, he had spent 4 months being performed at, and he had forgotten how to simply be beside a person. But he learned, and by the second week he had stopped standing at the top of the bank and started sitting on the shingle at the low water, out of the wind, where I could talk to him while I minded the crossing. And he asked me about the river. Real questions. Where the undercut was and why. How I knew which stones held. What it was like to lose the 2 I lost. Nobody had ever asked me about the river, as though it were a thing worth knowing, rather than a thing beneath knowing, and a king sat on my shingle and asked me the second question, and then the third, and I have never entirely recovered from it. His wolf came in the 5th week and disgraced him immediately. An enormous grey animal came down my bank at dawn, waded straight into the shallows of a river in melt, which no sane creature does, and stood there looking enormously pleased with himself while the current tried to take his legs out, and then came and lay down on my shingle, soaking wet, and put his head on my foot. "He is not to go in the water," Sigurd said, appalled Arn. "Tell me he did not just go in the water." "He went in the water, Your Grace," said Arn, with the flat satisfaction of a man who has stopped hoping. "The children of Rushford adored him within a day. Nils, once he recovered, would come down and sit with him for hours. The wolf let a 6-year-old who had nearly drowned sit against him at the edge of the water that had nearly taken him, and I have thought since that the animal knew exactly what he was doing, because Sigurd certainly did not. I asked him, in that 5th week, why the progress had stopped. I had worked up to it for days, because I am not a woman who asks great men their business, and because I had begun to be frightened of the answer. 4 months of a lunar tour, village after village, and it had halted dead at a river crossing for over a month, and a progress that stops does not stop for nothing. "You know why," he said. "I'd rather you said it." "I've been guessing, and my guesses are all mad, and one of them has me being taken up for wasting the crown's time." That got something out of him that was almost a laugh. Then it went, and he looked at the water for a while. "Because if it moves on," he said, "I have to be at the end of it. And at the end of it, there is a thing I have to do that I have not been able to make myself do, and every day the progress sits here at your ford is a day I do not have to do it. And I am aware that is not a reason a king is allowed to give, and I have given it to you anyway. What thing? I can't tell you yet. His jaw moved. I want to. I have wanted to for 3 weeks, and every time I nearly do, I understand that the moment I tell you, you will start deciding what to make of it instead of what to make of me. And I have had 4 months of people deciding what to make of my crown. I would like a few more mornings on a riverbank first. That is selfish, and I know it, and I am doing it anyway. I did not press him. I have found that a person tells you the true thing faster if you let the current bring it rather than reaching for it. But I went home that night and lay awake, because a king had told me that there was a thing at the end of his own progress that he could not bear to do, and that a ford in the middle of nowhere was the only place in the north he was allowed to not do it, and I did not have the first idea what could frighten a man like that, and I had begun, without deciding to want very badly to be a place a person like that was allowed to stop. I did not know yet what my name was worth, or why a king had stopped a 4-month progress, dead at a river crossing, and would not move it on. If you want to find out what a spoken word can void, and what a woman does when she learns that her own yes might cost a province a war, stay with me. What I found out at the end of 6 weeks turned the whole of it inside out, and I very nearly gave up the one thing that was ever mine to give. Lady Catherine found me at the ford in the 6th week, and I want to tell it carefully, because everyone gets her wrong. She came down to the river alone, in a dress worth more than my house, and she was beautiful and cold and precise. And she was the last person I expected, and the first person to tell me the truth. You don't know, do you? She said. You genuinely do not know what you are standing in the middle of. I can see it on you. She looked at the water. I am Catherine of Dramar. I am the reason for this progress, and I am the woman the King of Frostmere is meant to name at the end of it, and until a fairy woman climbed out of a river, I was going to be. I did not say anything. She was clearly not finished. There is no free choosing, Catherine said. There was never going to be a free choosing. My father's house holds the Eastern Marches, and the Marches have been at the edge of war with Frostmere for 3 years, and the price of peace was a marriage, me to your king. But Frostmere law does not allow an arranged Luna. So the Crown built a fiction, a progress, a choosing tour, village to village, and at the end of it, at the last stop, the king would freely name the one high-born woman who had happened to travel the whole way with him. Her mouth was thin. Me. It was going to be me. And it was going to be called love, and 400 years of your beautiful old law was going to be used to launder a treaty neither of us agreed to. Then why are you telling me? Because he stopped the progress at a river, Catherine said, and he has not looked at me in 6 weeks, and I have watched a king who was going to say my name out of duty forget I exist, because a woman went into the water without checking whether he was watching. She looked at me, and there was nothing warm in it, and nothing false either. I do not want him. I want that understood. I have never wanted him. But I am not a fool, and I know what it means that he wants you, and I have come to tell you what it costs before someone who does want the arrangement tells you a shaped version of it. What does it cost? If he names you, Catherine said, the treaty voids. My father takes it as the insult it is, and the Marches go to war with Frostmere by the autumn. Because a border that was bought with a marriage does not stay bought when the marriage is thrown over for a fairy woman. She stood. That is the price of your name, Freya of Rushford. A great many people will die on a border you have never seen, so that a king can have the one thing he chose for himself. I thought you should hear it from the woman it also ruins, rather than from the men who arranged it. And then she went back up the bank, and left me standing in the river holding the whole of it, and I want to tell you that I was noble about it, and I was not. Something in me went very still and very clear. For 25 years, I had gone where the water was going. That is not a figure of speech for me. It is the actual trade, the actual philosophy, the thing my mother put into me before I could read. You do not fight a current bigger than you. You find where it is already headed, and you make your peace with it. It had kept me alive in a river that killed my grandfather. It had made me good at the one thing I was good at, and it had also, I understood standing there in the cold with Catherine's news in my hands, made me a woman who would give up the only thing she had ever wanted the instant somebody powerful told her the current was too big. I was going to refuse him. I decided it that same night, on the shingle, alone, in the dark. Because the law let me, the named woman may refuse, once, in the same breath, and a refusal would set him free and set Catherine free and hold the border and cost nobody anything except a ferrywoman who had never expected anything in the first place. It was the humble thing and the decent thing and the thing I was raised to do, which is to go where the water is already going and not fight a current bigger than me. I told Sigurd, the next morning, that when he named me, I would refuse. I have never seen a man go so still. Say that again. Catherine told me what it costs. The treaty, the border, the war. My voice was steadier than I felt. I'm a ferrywoman, Your Grace. I've spent my whole life learning not to fight the river. You don't win against a thing that big. You go where it's already going. And this is bigger than me, and I am not going to be the reason a border burns. And so when you name me, I'll refuse. And you'll be free to do the thing that keeps the peace. And that's the end of it. He looked at me for a long moment, and then he did not argue, which frightened me more than arguing would have. You'd do that, he said. I'd do that. You would stand in front of the whole court and refuse the one thing you want, to hold a peace that isn't yours to hold, because you have decided you are too small to be worth a war. He said it very quietly. Freya, has it occurred to you to check whether the river is actually going where they've told you it's going? I did not understand him. Not for 4 more days. I understood him because of the carts. That is genuinely how. I keep the ford, and I keep count of what crosses it, because the crossing tolls are how I eat, and I had been watching the Eastern Road for 6 weeks, and there had been no trade off the marches. None, not one dromar cart, not one marches drover, in 6 weeks, on the only road that connects them to us. In the season when that road is busiest, you do not stop trading with a territory you are about to marry into. You trade more. You send goods ahead of the wedding. Unless there is not going to be a wedding, and there was never going to be, because the thing that road actually carries had already stopped. I sat down on my own shingle and went cold all over, and it was not the water. I did not go to the king. I went to Catherine, and I asked her one question, the question nobody had wanted me to ask, which was, when did your father last send anything down the Eastern Road? And Lady Catherine of Dromar looked at me, and I watched her do the same arithmetic I had done, and I watched her face change. In the winter, she said slowly. He recalled the marches trade in the winter. He told me it was the roads. She sat down, which a woman like that does not do. The treaty was signed in the spring. He recalled the trade before the treaty was signed. Here is what had actually happened, and it took the 2 of us and Arn most of a night to lay it out. The treaty was dead. It had been dead before it was ever signed. Catherine's father, the Lord of Dromar, had already made his peace elsewhere. A quieter, better bargain with a territory further east, sealed in the winter, which was why he had pulled his trade off the Frostmere road before spring. The marriage to Sigurd was worthless to him. He had signed it anyway, and let it go forward, for one reason, because a betrothal in progress is a thing you can hold over a king. As long as Frostmere believed the peace hung on the wedding, Frostmere would give Dromar anything to keep the wedding on the rails, grain, gold, the border tolls, the garrison at the eastern crossing quietly stood down. There was no war waiting behind my refusal. There was a bill. Dromar was being paid every month in the coin of a piece that had already been bought and paid for somewhere else. And the only thing keeping the payments coming was a fiction that the border would burn if the marriage fell through. And the man collecting on Frostmayer's side, the man who had built the choosing tour, who had drafted the fiction, who had ridden 6 weeks at the head of that progress, steering a king toward a bride whose father had already sold him out, was Lord Merrow, the Chancellor. The master of the progress, who had a great deal of Dromar's quiet gratitude in accounts that did not have his name on them. Catherine had not known. That is the part I hold on to. She had been sold twice, once by her father to Frostmere, and once by her father's real bargain to keep her in the dark so she would play her part convincingly. She was the most deceived person in the whole affair, and she was the one they were all counting on to be too proud to check. Merrow moved the moment he understood that I had. He called the choosing to its close. The final stop, the last village, the great gathering where the king would name his Luna in front of the assembled north, and he brought it forward by a fortnight. Before I could get anything I knew in front of anyone who mattered, and he arranged it so that the naming would happen in the hall at Rushford, with the whole progress as witness, because he was certain of 2 things, that the king would name me and that I would refuse. He had heard about the refusal. Of course he had, and a refusal was better for him than a compliant bride. A refusal freed the king straight back into the arrangement, on the record, witnessed, with a ferrywoman's own humility as the seal on it. He was not afraid of my no. He was counting on it. That is how I came to be standing in that hall, covered, for once, in something other than mud, with 400 people watching. And the King of Frostmere looking at me the way he had looked at me for 6 weeks, and Lord Merrow at the front saying, "Name yourself, or step aside, and let a woman who understands what is at stake take your place." He meant it as mercy. That is the craft of a man like Merrow. He gave me the noble exit in front of everybody, step aside, hold the peace, be the good small woman, and he was so certain I would take it that I watched him relax when I opened my mouth. I did not step aside. Before I answer, I said, "To the hall." Not to him. I keep the ford at Rushford, and I keep the tolls, and I keep count of what crosses. And I would like to ask Lord Merrow, in front of everyone, why the Eastern Road has carried no Dromar trade since the winter, since before the treaty this whole progress is built to honour was ever signed. The hall did not understand. But Merrow did, and I watched a man who had steered a king for 6 weeks go the colour of the river in flood. "You do not stop trading with a house you are about to marry," I said. Unless the marriage was never worth anything to them, and it wasn't, and Lord Merrow knows it wasn't, and Lady Catherine's father has been paid twice for a piece he already sold, once by the East and once by this crown, every month, for keeping a wedding on the rails that everyone at the top of this progress knows is a corpse. I turned to Sigurd. "There is no war behind my name, Your Grace. There never was. That was the lie that was going to make me refuse you, and it very nearly worked, because I have spent my whole life being told not to fight a current bigger than me. But this current was going the other way the entire time, and I finally went and checked. It came apart the way these things come apart, not in a clean moment, but in a slow horror spreading through a room, as 400 people did arithmetic they had never been invited to do. Catherine stood up and confirmed the winter recall of the trade, in her own voice, as the Lord of Dromar's own daughter, which no one could gainsay. Arn had the toll counts, mine, 6 weeks of an empty Eastern Road, in my own hand. And the Crown's own progress accounts, once the King ordered them opened that night, agreed with all of it. Merrow did not confess. Men like him never do. There is no need, because there is no single crime to confess to. He had told no lie that could be pinned. The treaty was signed. The trade recall had an explanation. The payments to Dromar had a purpose on paper. He had simply arranged a set of true things into a shape, and taken the gratitude that shape produced, and steered a king toward a bride to keep the shape standing. It took a year to unpick, and he lost everything to it. In the end, not for treason, but for the slower thing, which is that 400 people had watched a ferrywoman see clearly what he had spent 6 weeks making certain no one looked at. And Sigurd named me. He did it properly, in the old way, in front of the whole assembled north, and before he did, he crossed that hall and stood in front of me and said, "Lo, so the law would still hear it, but I would hear it first. I am going to name you. And you may still refuse, and it will still be free, because there is no war behind it now, and there never was, and I need you to know that before I do, that a refusal costs nothing but me, tonight, and that I would rather be refused by you, honestly, than say anyone else's name for the rest of my life." "You could just name me," I said. "I could." Something moved at the corner of his mouth. "You went into a river without checking whether I was watching. The least I can do is give you the chance to walk out of this hall without checking whether I am." He named me. And I did not refuse. I kissed him first, in that hall, in front of the whole north, still not entirely believing any of it, and it was brief, and it was warm, and it settled something in me that had been braced since I was old enough to understand that a ferrywoman is a thing the world uses and does not keep. The fallout was long. The peace with the Marches had to be built again, properly this time, in the open, without a marriage to launder it, which turned out to be perfectly possible, because the East had been ready to deal for a year, and only Merrow's fiction had kept anyone from noticing. It cost gold, and it cost a hard season of negotiation, and it cost Dromar a great deal of its standing, and not one person died on that border, because there was never going to be a war. There was only ever a bill, and we stopped paying it. Catherine of Dromar did not become my friend, exactly. She became something I value more, which is a person who tells me the truth whether or not I want it. And who was the one who told me the truth at the start when a shaped version would have served her better? She holds the Eastern Crossing now, on Frostmere's behalf, by her own choosing, a woman who was sold twice and now cannot be sold at all. And who is, I am told, terrifying at it. 3 years on, I still keep the ford. I would not give it up, and there was a fight about it, and I won, and there is now a very fine stone crossing being built a mile upriver that will one day make my ford unnecessary, which I approve of entirely. Because the point was never the tolls. The point was that somebody who knows the water should be at the water. I have trained 4 of them now, from 4 villages, and 2 are women, and every one of them can tell you where the undercut is. Nils is 9 and swims like an otter and is forbidden the stones in the melt and goes on the stones in the melt, and I haul him off by his collar exactly as I was hauled, and he will keep the ford after me if he wants it, and I think he wants it. Sigurd's wolf still goes in the river, every spring, in the melt, straight in, against all sense, and stands there letting the current fight his legs with an expression of enormous idiot joy, and Sigurd stands on the bank telling him to come out, and he does not come out, and I have stopped pretending I do not find it the funniest thing in the north. And I still say the thing my mother taught me, most days, to whoever is learning the water: you don't fight the rush. You go where it's already going. I said it to a king once as a reason to give up the only thing I ever wanted. I have learnt since that it was never advice about surrender. It was advice about looking, about finding out where the current is actually going before you decide you cannot beat it. Most of the time, you have simply been told the wrong direction by someone who profits from you not checking. I still wonder about Catherine's father, honestly, more than I wonder about Merrow. Merrow wanted money and told a shaped truth to get it, and there is no mystery in a man like that. But a father sold his own daughter into a marriage he knew was worthless, and kept her ignorant so she would play her part. And I have met that man since, and he is charming and grieved, and entirely certain he did the sensible thing for his house. Tell me in the comments whether you think he ever, once, saw her as anything but a toll to be collected. I have never been able to decide, and she will not talk about it, and I have stopped asking. Comment the Ford if you want to hear what Sigurd's wolf did the first time he tried to cross the river, carrying Nils on his back, without asking me first. And if you want more nights like this one, a king steered for 6 weeks toward a lie, a fairy woman who nearly gave up her whole life to hold a peace that was already dead, and one empty road that told the truth when 400 people couldn't. Stay close. There is more of Frostmere left to tell. Where are you listening from tonight? I would love to know.